When I used to work at a dealership a million years ago, two things were essentially guaranteed. One, that one of the technicians was definitely not sober, and two, that a tool truck would show up to block one of the parking spots around roughly the same time every single week. And if you ever worked at a trade where buying tools is a requirement, whether you're an electrician, a plumber, or anybody who works on a general contracting job site, then you've most likely seen one of these tool trucks, whether it's from Mac Tools or Snap-on or the likes. And if you've seen one of these tool trucks or you worked in a trade that requires you to buy tools, you could probably guess where I'm going with this. See, the whole point of tool trucks is to offer workers on site the ability to buy tools at a specific price. Now, of course, each tool manufacturer has their own suggested MSRP that they would prefer for me to sell these tools at, but tool trucks have the special ability to offer deals or incentives based on how much they like you or the business that they're doing partnerships with. Now, I'm all for being able to have somebody outside with a 10mm socket waiting for me as soon as mine blows up. However, Snap and Mac tools are generally pretty damn expensive, with the main draw being a lifetime warranty. Now, I think a lifetime warranty is a great deal, especially considering that tools are likely to break under heavy use. I think more things should have a lifetime warranty. Where things get a little bit tricky though is how their pricing works and how the system essentially incentivizes these tool truck companies to mark up prices, lure in young impressionable workers, and then offer them like high APR credit lines on tools that cost way more than they should from a regular reputable seller. Spend a lot of time on a work site where tools are common, and eventually the allure of buying a new tool from one of these tool trucks becomes a little bit too strong. But my main thing is that does a year one technician really need $10,000 in tools just to work on some cars? The answer is most likely no, as most senior workers will tell you, you probably shouldn't be spending all that money on tools, especially if you have student debt. So how did we get here? How did the tool industry end up convincing a bunch of young impressionable kids that they needed to spend hundreds if not thousands of dollars on Milwaukee tool set? I'm sorry, like, why is this backpack so expensive? Like, what are we talking about here? And how has consumerism in the tool space ended up tricking a bunch of apprentices into thinking that Klein tools are the do or die of all electrical tools, and without them, they're less? Is it the curriculum? Is it our culture as a whole? Well, you see, the answer is a little bit more complex than that, because this doesn't just apply to people who work in trades, it's also affecting people who also work in the hobbyist space. And this got me thinking, are we secretly living in a tool dystopia? And if so, what can we do about it? See, up until this point, we've only been talking about tools that are optional, but right now I want to take a chance to talk about tools that are mandatory. Now, for anyone who's ever worked at a Ford or Lincoln dealership, you're probably familiar with these big, bulky, obnoxious laptops that you need to basically work on any car, from a 2004 Mercury all the way up into the latest F-150. Now, this is the same for any car dealership, whether you work at a Honda, Toyota, Saab, Saab dealership, sorry, that's funny. In my last video, I had to go out of my way to buy a special interface to connect to my Volvo, and that interface was not cheap. That's because most of the software features that my car had was locked behind a proprietary software that required me to use a proprietary interface to connect to it. And the reason why that happened is because car manufacturers make it so that the only way to really access their computer systems inside of your car is by using a proprietary connector tool with a proprietary software that oftentimes has proprietary licenses. I was just so fortunate enough to own a car where the community was really good at hacking into things like that, and I was able to use a connector from a Jaguar Land Rover vehicle, which is also common with Ford and other vehicles, that allowed me to do it. But even then, that whole endeavor cost me $200 in tools alone, and there was no other way for me to really go about doing it for cheaper unless I wanted to risk bricking my car. Looking at these professional scan tools, you can see that the automotive space, especially with the advent of computers being the main thing that controls everything in the car, has gotten a little expensive. I would say that car companies are probably the biggest perpetrators of anti-consumer friendly practices, locking down systems behind paywalls, licenses, and just making it a general pain in the ass to service your own car. And that's saying something, because these car companies have been standardizing their connections since 1996. That's when the OBD2 came out and became standard on all cars going forward, so that diagnostics tools could be easily accessed by the average person, whether they're working at a car dealership, their backyard, or they're just working at AutoZone. What this really boils down to is taking away the autonomy from the owner of the device. You might own your car, but you don't own the rights to repair it. And if you do own the rights to repair it, then whatever you do is going to void the warranty. And I don't think there's a bigger example of this than John Deere. If you haven't heard about how evil John Deere is, just go and look up John John Deere anti-consumer lawsuit. Well, I know what some of you are thinking. I don't really
care about working on my car besides doing an oil change and a basic tire repair every now and again. This doesn't affect me. Why should I care? I have no reason to ever go out and buy expensive scan tools or hardware to analyze the computer on my car.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but hobbyists have this problem too. And I would argue that hobbyists are a lot more susceptible to these issues than people who work in a trade or any form of blue-collar work. Now, if you're anything like me and you have a lot of hobbies, you've undoubtedly spent many an hour browsing forums, looking for the best options or the best ways to get into your hobby of choice. And Reddit and specific guided groups have always been a #1 resource in how to get into a hobby. And that also means that people who are a lot more experienced probably found the same problems you did with the same standard set of equipment that most people use. Sometimes they go on to make open source things like the PineSill or OpenWRT for people who are into networking on routers. Even hobbyism isn't immune to the cold, hard grasp of enshittification that will come for us all. And knowing this, the price gouging could be pretty real, but a lot of this can be summed up with familiarity heuristics. See, familiarity heuristics is defined as a cognitive shortcut where people favor trust or choose options that are familiar, well-known, or experienced before/over novel alternatives. This is the power of marketing at work, even if the product isn't that great. Take, for example, Raspberry Pi and the Raspberry Pi Foundation, one of the most popular, if not the most popular, microboard computer systems to ever come out. And for a long time, Raspberry Pi was a de facto from everywhere from at-home hobbyists to what you learned in the classroom. But as time has gone on, even they've generally tended to veer towards businesses over the average consumer/hobbyist. Jeff Geerling actually has a wonderful video about this, explaining how Raspberry Pi basically lost his crown as the value budget king and how it hasn't really iterated or made major changes to stay competitive in an ever-shifting landscape of new ARM-powered computers. It's a great watch, highly recommended. But even though we know that Raspberry Pi isn't what it used to be, it's the brand cachet that's allowed it to keep its crown even after all these years. I mean, the same thing can be seen with the arts and crafts space too. If you ever walked into Joann's, Michael's, or any sort of arts and crafts store, you undoubtedly seen Cricut. As a company that specializes in making tools for stickers, embroidery, and laser cutting, and has had a mostly pretty dominant market share when it comes to that space. Chances are, if you know anybody who is between the ages of 18 to 60, they probably own a Cricut product here or there, or they've owned a Cricut product when they've been doing stuff like scrapbooking or even decorating their collection of Stanley cups. And even though Cricut isn't the best in class, they spent a lot of money and time to have that brand cachet, making sure that they're at the front of every Michael's you've ever walked into, making sure that they have colorful branding, easily identified packaging, and bright colors to draw the eye of anybody from your average middle schooler to your grandma at home. Despite this, they had some of the worst consumer-friendly offerings for the longest while, having always online server-based software instead of using something that's client-side, requiring you to always be connected to the internet, having no replaceable parts for you to use, so if something goes wrong, you actually have to send it to somebody like the Cricut doctor and make sure that they can fix it for you, and basically offering no support for any third-party vendors or sellers, and making it so that the only way for you to really get a Cricut fixed is by buying a new one. And other hobbies have these issues as well. If you've ever been into laser cutting or woodworking, you've undoubtedly come across Glowforge, which outside of the US has terrible software support, terrible parts replacements, and generally no way for you to get support for any broken machinery, even if you were buying it under an education license or for a large institution like a college or a library. The quote has always been, there's no such thing as a bad product, only a bad price. But when the item that you bought isn't really yours to work on or to fix, or there's no replacement parts, or there's just generally no support in your country of purchase, then did you really own the item to begin with? And is there even a good price for an item like that? Now, the most savvy amongst you are probably saying to yourselves, well, why are people buying these mainstream products? Don't they know that this offering from niche
supplier number XY35 on AliExpress is a lot better than that stupid piece of junk that you find at Home Depot?
And to that, I say to you, remember familiarity heuristics? By any chance? And I don't think it's fair to really pass that criticism on to the consumer, especially someone who's new to the hobby space, for going with what most people recommend. So if this is a product that everyone is telling you to buy and it turns out it has terrible customer support, terrible repairability, and just generally sucks to use overall, then you would be a little remiss for not knowing to pick something better, especially if you're just starting out. I think one of the biggest and most egregious reasons that we have such a hard time finding a good recommendation can also be summed up with influencer marketing. Now, I have a marketing background, so I understand the need for people to go out and get that money. But at the same time though, it can be a little hard to trust whether or not the people that you look up to for reviews and advice are actually giving you legitimate positive reviews because they like the product and think that it's worth purchasing, or if they've been paid off. You see, there's a law stipulating that reviewers have to disclose whether or not they are paid to do a review or whether or not that review is an ad. Now the issue is that it doesn't tell you where or when you have to disclose that, meaning you can watch an entire video about a product, get to the end and then realize that it was one big advertisement that they've been paid to say all of those things. Now that's an issue because a lot of people don't actually end up watching the end of the video, which means that they've been under the impression that what they're looking at the whole time was actually a product of good quality and not something that they were being tricked into buying by someone who's getting paid. And another big thing is that influencers oftentimes have investments in these companies that they don't always disclose. Some of them might be a little bit more forthright, explaining that they have investments in these companies and therefore they do have an incentive to say good things about them, but a lot of them oftentimes don't, and that's how you find out behind the scenes that what you were promised maybe was told for the sake of just boosting shareholders' profits. And all of this, coupled with the integration of e-commerce apps into social media, has really created a race to the bottom. TikTok Shop, Instagram Store, and basically whatever Temu integrations that they have going on has made it so that people can just click on a video and buy the product immediately without giving it much thought. And this creates a kind of race to the bottom where you're just buying a product because you saw it in a video, it looks good, and when you get there, it's nothing like it was promised. And I know there are YouTubers and reviewers and journalists out there who are doing excellent work to make sure that they have a good understanding of the products and whether or not it's worth purchasing. Knowing how to balance between good and trash can really make or break a hobby. A good tool can make a simple job take no time at all, and a bad tool or lack thereof tools can make a simple job take 2 months. Ask me how I know. And with all the infighting on Reddit and conflicting opinions from AI that are hallucinating and drinking up lakes just to give you a basic answer, it can be really hard to get a good solid answer. So where do we go from here? Well, the good thing is that forums have always existed and always will continue to exist as a way of getting good and accurate answers from people who are invested in a community. Reddit is the most common form of that forum style, but there are other resources that you can also look at if you're looking at something that's a little bit more specific. I know the car industry is full of them, but same things apply for anything from basic arts and crafts to doing more advanced complex problems with computers to even bread making. Shout out to bread making. Big 2026, we get into bread making, guys. Go outside, buy yourself a bread maker, let me see that rye. And on top of that, the secondhand market, especially with e-commerce being as big as it is, has never been better. Local Facebook marketplace groups, pawn shops, online forums, or just going to your local yard sale, you can really find some good gems. I think now as things become more expensive and the world becomes unfortunately even shittier than it was before, it's important for us to start thinking more flexibly. How can we engage in hobbies that we're passionate about or trying to be passionate about, but without being engaged or trapped in systems that just don't work for us and are actually anti-consumerist? This was a bit of a long video, but it was a video that I wanted to make as I've noticed that I was having trouble finding the tools that I needed to continue my hobbies. From all my time spent on Reddit and forums and just browsing DIY YouTube, I found that there's a lot of options out there. And as long as you're willing to put in the effort, I think you can find an option that works for you without feeling like you're being screwed over by a big company that doesn't care about you, anything you stand for, or basically wants to see all your information harvested and uploaded to an AI cloud for them to lay off like 5,000 employees. Bit of a ranty one, but if you liked the video, make sure to leave a like and a comment. I do enjoy making content like this, and make sure to tell me some of your issues that you've had with tools or maybe some alternatives that you were forced to find. We'll be returning to more car stuff soon, but I want to take a quick break and do a little bit of yapping on the side. I've been Ray, this has been my channel, and I'll see you guys all next time.